Digest Broadcaster Chat. I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strassler with the Lansing Lugnuts, joined by Mick Gillispie with the Tennessee Smokies. Mick, hello.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see you guys.
And Kevin Reichard of Ballpark Digest, in addition to Arena Digest, including Football Stadium Digest, including everything that goes on. Kevin, how are you?
I am great today. It's a lovely 57 degrees. It's not sunny. It is a perfect spring day.
It's gorgeous out there. We continue to be inside and sheltering in place, but there are things going on, and let's relate them to baseball. Mick, as a broadcaster in the Southern League, we've got The Last Dance right now being shown, cataloging Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls from the 1990s and the 80s leading into the 90s. And right in the thick of that, he played for the Birmingham Barons. Birmingham's broadcaster Kurt Bloom is still in the Southern League. Have you had the chance to talk to CB at all about that?
Yeah, I remember when that was going on. Obviously, it was before my time in professional baseball, but I remember the hype that Michael Jordan had when he was playing and everyone wanting to go to the games and see him around the Southern League that season. And then Kurt, I've talked to CB about the Jordan years a lot, and he's got some great memories. He's still in the league, like you said, but, they traveled on the bus together and got to go out to eat with him. And I think he still keeps a relationship with Jordan. It's a shame that baseball went on strike because I'm curious to see, if Jordan could have gotten to the major leagues, but still with, no sports going on, we're reliving the Michael Jordan years with this ESPN documentary. And look, I'm a Michael Jordan fan. I think he's the best player ever. I remember watching him as a kid. I remember when he was like a young guy and didn't have any good players around him on the Bulls, and used to lose to Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And then all of a sudden it was like they got past the Pistons and you couldn't stop them, and had he not played baseball, I wonder if they would have won like 8 straight championships.
The funny thing is, baseball is generally seen as the sport that cares more about its history than anything else. That baseball can lean into those memories, and football, basketball just want to look forward and look at who's in the game right now. And The Last Dance is telling basketball fans, hey, look back, which allows us, Kevin, let's relate this immediately to ballparks. We can look back at what the ballparks were like in the Southern League then.
Oh, it was a whole different game then. I mean, the Barons played at Rickwood, and you can still walk to Rickwood Field and, catch some action there, catch the Classic, probably not this year, but, next year, I'm sure. And it is an almost otherworldly experience because I don't know if either one of you have been to a Classic or not.
Yeah.
The ballpark is set up like it would have been in the early days of the game. The players and coaches are wearing heavy wool uniforms, which the last time I was there was 101 degrees, and the coaches were all complaining about it. And there's a little band playing in the grandstand, and it's just truly magical. So the Southern League, the Classic really does feel like old days, or when Jordan would have played there. That place would have been rocking with Jordan there.
Mick, tell me about that Rickwood Field experience, that old game, the game played back there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I went as a student at the University of Alabama, drove up there in the summer and went to one of the first ones. I think I went to the second one as a fan, and I broadcasted 2 of those when Smokies played there, and I was their radio guy. But I also played in that stadium, which is going to be unique for me, compared to any other place I'll probably ever broadcast. I was in a semi-pro league while I was a student, and you played some games in that stadium. So I can remember being in right field in that place, or in the bullpen, and getting the bat, and I had some pretty good games there. So when I went and got the broadcast for the first time, that was really neat, just kind of having the experience of, that a lot of the people that I work with in baseball have, they played in the big leagues, and then they played in all these stadiums they work at, or, the same thing with the minor leagues. But, for me, it was just that one place. And when you walk in there, it really feels like time has, gone backwards. And they do a fantastic job, the Barons, in putting that together. And I hope that they continue to do that, because people like us that love the game, it's that one place you can go to once a year where it's not about, the advertising, and it's not about the in-between inning games or the beer specials. It's about the game that day. And you wear the old throwback uniforms. I can remember the players, like, when I was so excited about it, thinking, like, what is this? We got to get up early. We got to not drive into the stadium where we were at. We got to drive over there. And then they get there and they have the best experience that they could ever have. Ty Wright, who's a coach now in the Pirates system, played on our team. And Ty was like, this is one of the things I love the best about the game, wearing the old uniform and playing in that stadium. I'll never forget it. In 2011, Marquez Smith hit a home run for us in the 11th inning, and we won the game. It wasn't a walk-off, but we were being the road team. And I told him, I said, I wanted to win this game, so I guess I owe you lunch or something, because that just was so fantastic. But I wore the throwbacks too, like I had like the little brimmed hat and like a jacket that had like a big pattern on it, like from the old days, So we got into it. CB has his look that he does every year, and he's lucky because he's gotten to do all of these Rickwood Classics. But if you're a baseball fan and you want to experience something that's a lot different, then the Rickwood Classic is definitely something that you should put on the top of your list while they're still doing it.
So, Mick, let me ask you this. If we're going to go back to the ballparks Jordan would have played in, are there any still left? I mean, Joe Engel, which I would love to hear your view of it, obviously is still around. And I wonder if the Smokies were still using, or the Lookouts were still using it when he played in the Southern League.
Yeah, I think Jordan played at the Hoover Met. I don't know if they had a Rickwood Classic that year, but I'm pretty sure it was the Met when he was there, because he bought a room for them. Like, I guess somehow he helped them out, like for going out of their way for him or something. Yeah, it's, I remember when they used to play there, you would go through the Jordan room, and it had this giant like Jordan, picture on the wall and stuff. It was pretty cool. But I'm guessing all the stadiums that he played in are gone now. The Smokies played at Bill Myers Stadium. They've been at Smoky Stadium since 2000. Chattanooga played at Engel Stadium. And to give you an idea of how fast their stadium's like weathered, I mean, it's time for them to get a new stadium now. They're kind of looking at like they're going to need a new stadium. I mean, they're on that list of teams to be, not have a team. So that's no good. And I think it's the stadium, because the city's fantastic. Maybe Jackson, but no, because they got there in '98. So no, it wouldn't have been Jackson. They would have played in Orlando. Mobile just left the league last year. Yeah, I don't think there's any left that Jordan played in. What's that?
They would have been a Tinker Field back then for
Yeah, would have been Tinker. Jacksonville has a new stadium since then. Mobile isn't in the league anymore, but they even opened in '98. So you're talking '94.
Was Montgomery in the league back then in the ballpark?
Okay. Montgomery joined about 2004.
Right.
Yeah, 2004. So
Rebs, I believe, wasn't it?
No, they didn't have a team, right?
No, Cranwich or something like that. That ballpark's still around. It's one of the few old ballparks in the state still standing. But it's more.
But I don't think but I mean, they didn't have the Biscuits, or Montgomery wouldn't have had a team though in '84. I mean, in '94 in the Southern League, right? Like
I'm sure Jesse's looking at it right now. He's the smart.
Yeah, no. Their last team was in 1979 when they were like the Rebs, right? And then they left and came somewhere, maybe Birmingham. I had it all figured out one day, like every single team in the Southern League and like where they started, you know, like Charlotte went from here to here to here, you know, Nashville went from here to here to here. But I don't think Montgomery was part of that.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Mick is absolutely right. There's no Montgomery. Instead, here's what we have. And I'll start with the places that we've mentioned. The Barons playing at the Hoover Met. Chattanooga playing at Engel. Then, beyond them, Jacksonville playing at Sam W. Wolfson Baseball Park. The
Yeah.
Smokies playing at Meyer. The Greenville Braves at Greenville Municipal Stadium. The Carolina Mudcats at Five County Stadium. Orlando playing at Tinker Field. Huntsville at Joe W. Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Memphis at Tim McCarver Stadium. And the Nashville Express at Herschel Greer Stadium.
Yeah. Yeah, how about that?
Amazing. Amazing.
Doesn't seem that long ago.
Around too. It's kind of funny. I mean, I drove out there with Mark McCarter when I was down in Huntsville to see the new ballpark. It's being fixed up. There was a crew out there tearing down stuff and painting and converting it to soccer and football and youth activities.
There was a fatal flaw with the Joe Davis Stadium. And that was the way that they built the press box and the luxury boxes and everything, you know, because you couldn't walk out and go into the crowd. You know, you were basically, it was like a trailer. And then, you know, like it just looked like a trailer and the windows were in there. The press box windows, they could open, but they were added like later on, you know. And then it was so big, you know, it was like this giant spaceship, you know, like it was round and it had, you know, concrete everywhere and these giant like bleachers, and they'd get, you know, like, I don't know, 500 people in there on a Monday, and it felt like there were like 10 in there, you know. But I will say this about Huntsville is those 500 that came on Monday, came on Tuesday, came on Wednesday. They had they were like the Oakland A's. They just had this really loyal, maybe small group, but the people that were like down for Huntsville Stars baseball loved it.
I call them Montgomery Biscuits, as you're wearing your biscuit shirt. Biscuits versus Huntsville Stars Southern League Championship. And they won it in Huntsville. Dramatic game, home run in the top of the ninth, and then double play ball to beat them in the bottom of the ninth. And as we're driving away from Joe W. Davis Stadium, police officer stops us because we were going a little bit quick. I was not driving. I was the kid number 2 with a bunch of biscuit staff, all celebratory. And the officer pulls us over, and he looks at what we're wearing, and he goes, "Oh, do you win tonight?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." Everyone in the car started shouting, and the police officers, "Oh, Southern League champions!" And he let us go.
Yeah. I remember that series. The Smokies lost a dramatic Game 5 in Huntsville, or it would have been the Smokies and the Biscuits in the championship game that series. We had Tyler Colvin hit what should have been a game-tying triple with 2 outs, except Casey McGee was running ahead of him and stopped at third, and we couldn't figure out like why he stopped at third. And Casey blamed Pat Listash, who was the third base coach, and Pat blamed Casey for not running hard enough. And we ended up leaving the tying and winning runs on base there in a Game 5, you know. So, and I'll never forget that, though, because your old partner, Jim Tocco, was texting me during the game. Like, we had a big lead that we blew, and he was congratulating me. The kiss of death in those type of games. And then you guys had the one of the most thrilling Southern League championship wins ever.
Come from behind, go ahead home run in the top of the 9th inning.
Yeah.
We were trying to figure out how many times in the decisive game with a team down to its very end, hitting a home run like that has ever happened in a championship game, in a Game 5 in the minor leagues, or a Game 7 in the major leagues at any point. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, not really many. I mean, I can't imagine it, you know, and I remember listening and just shocked, you know, and Brett Pollock was the broadcaster of Huntsville, and, you know, and him crying after the game, you know, it's like, this game will rip your heart out sometimes. And
Yes.
I mean, as happy as you guys were getting pulled over, at the same time, here's Pollock that's just like representing every emotion that you can have in baseball, and, in 3 outs, right? Crying, and then you guys beat him again the next year, right? Or was that was the second year that you guys beat him? So,
Yes.
so you'd beaten him in 06, and then that was 07.
About Rickwood Field, and I'm going to connect this, Kevin, with Hamtramck was just in the news. There are not too many stadiums that are still around that hosted Negro League baseball games. Mick, we have talked at length about the Negro Leagues. Rickwood Field was in the movie 42 because it hosted Negro League games. And so, Kevin, let me throw this right to you. Hamtramck, what is the latest news?
The Wayne County received a grant of almost $500,000 to restore it. And I believe the total budget is $1 million or so. The Friends of Hamtramck have already raised a lot of money and worked very hard to make this a possibility. And it's a unique ballpark in that it was I'm going to distinguish here between ballparks that were full-time homes to Negro Leagues teams and ballparks that exist now that hosted games, because as I think as you get into the history of it, Negro League teams did a lot of barnstorming.
Mm-hmm.
They would play
where the money was.
That's where the money was. They'd play a full schedule at home and then barnstorm. Buck O'Neill once told me about the Monarchs would play games at Municipal Stadium and then barnstorm for 3 or 4 days in a row. They'd make the run up to St. Joseph, to Phil Welch, which is still standing, lovely little ballpark, then up to, I think, either Sioux City or Sioux Falls, then over to St. Paul, and then down to Des Moines, and then back to Kansas City. And that was in addition to all their other games. And that's how they made their living. So by my count, there's 6 ballparks that legitimately were full-time homes to Negro League teams, and that includes Rickwood, that includes Hamtramck, that includes Paterson's, the Paterson ballpark that's also received funds for upgrades. That includes the Jacksonville ballpark, Dundee Field, that used to also host minor league ball, was one of the ballparks that Jackie Robinson was locked out of his first spring training, still standing. And now I'm going to forget the other 2. But they're still around. And what's going to happen with Hamtramck? The field is still being used as a community resource. The grandstand's going to be restored. And the original flagpole is still there. That's going to be, freshened up. And it's a piece of real living history that's envisioned as much a shrine to the Negro Leagues as well as a community resource.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I mean, I talk a lot about the Negro Leagues, and I hope that, that what we do, Jesse, and you too, Kevin, that we can pass on how good and important those leagues were and those players were. I mean, it's always, when you look back at the history of baseball, just a travesty that we didn't get to see Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson, all these guys, Turkey Stearns, get to play in the major leagues against the best of the best, but those leagues had some really great players. They worked really hard to make money. And I think if I went back in time, it would have been as entertaining or even more entertaining to watch some of the games that they played as compared to what was going on in the major leagues, and I'm always intrigued by, the Dizzy Dean team against the Satchel Paige team, and I think if I had a time machine, I could take you and Kevin with me, Jesse, I'd probably go back to one of those games because Dizzy's guys, they had a lot of trouble with Satchel's guys, a lot of trouble. It doesn't surprise me either. There was a lot to prove out on those fields. And I think the one thing that they really did was they found respect, and they made a lot of money too. Baseball shut them down because they were outdrawing the major leagues. But we really need to keep these stadiums up because it like you said, it's living history. You go to Rickwood and you might learn something about the Birmingham Black Barons. You might learn about Satchel Paige pitching there, and a lot of the other great players that wore that Triple B hat, and they had great attendance. They were the pride of the state. They won a lot of championships, the Black Barons. And it's neat that you can still go there and the stadium is intact.
And one of the nice things about a classic is that they bring back Negro League players. We're still and they're there standing and talking and remember the old days. The Negro Leagues lasted until the early 60s, 60, 61, although never quite the same as when Robinson came out of them. The other two ballparks, by the way, that hosted full-time teams is Cooper Stadium in Columbus, which hosted a Negro Leagues major league team just for half a season, and Busch Stadium in Indianapolis, which I think we should discuss at some point in and of itself because of the fascinating story behind it. It's not a ballpark anymore, obviously. And there's the tease. It's apartments.
Yeah.
Mentioning Rickwood, Mick, the feeling of going in and understanding, here are the players I'm watching today play on this field. And think about all the other players who've been there, all the guys who've played center field here, the guys who've run the bases here. The oldest ballpark that I've ever broadcasted a game in is Bosse Field in Evansville. Just amazing to walk in there, and A League of Their Own was filmed there, so now you can envision it. To walk down the ramp, to step out of the dugout, to see the circular outfield stands and the way that this field was cut into its city block, and when the 19 teens it came from. That idea of stepping into and then broadcasting or simply watching baseball played in a park that has seen so many baseball games, that brings some awe to my mind.
Yeah. Rickwood, you go in there and it just has a weird echo to the place, like it just the way that the stands are set up, and there's been so many butts in those seats over the years. And, Babe Ruth hit this home run here. Every single great player at some point made a stop at Rickwood, and it wasn't because they were, minor leaguers necessarily. They would barnstorm back from spring training and swing in there and play a game. And, there's stories, Babe Ruth hit this ball, almost 500 feet there, and they can tell you where it hit the wall and stuff. You don't get that at the new stadiums. When the Orioles moved from Memorial Stadium to Camden Yards, I like Camden Yards. I mean, it changed ballparks, right? I mean, it was the first of these new amazing palaces, but it wasn't Memorial Stadium. And, I've talked to former Oriole players about it. It's just not the same. It's expensive. A lot of the locals that used to go from the neighborhood, they don't go anymore. It's more of a corporate situation. And then you lost all that history. Frank Robinson hit a home run out of Memorial Stadium, and they had a flag on the top of the bleachers that said "here," and that meant, hey, that's where Frank hit it out. And Harmon Killebrew hit, Mickey Mantle hit. Those two guys hit the two longest home runs ever hit in that stadium, and the Orioles won World Series there, and then all of a sudden you go to a new park and it's great. And the suites are great. And the experience is fantastic, but it's not the same because the history is not the same. I can't really explain why. I just remember as a kid walking up the turnstiles, and you'd at Memorial Stadium off the street going up, and then there was like this little spot where you could look through, and oh yeah, there's Eddie Murray at first and Cal Ripken at shortstop, and that's how it was for years. And watching Cal field every single ground ball perfectly during practice. And I pay attention to that, Jesse, every time I'm watching guys, the way they field and how they do their job. And, he did it the exact right way every time. Not a lot of players do that anymore, where they take all the drills, but it's just different, and there's something about baseball history when a magical, like the Orioles have this thing, Oriole Magic, all these great comebacks that they had, and the Brooks Robinsons and the Boog Powells and the Earl Weavers and Jim Palmers and all those guys played out there, Frank Robinson. That hasn't translated over to to Camden Yards, and so being able to go back and see a game at Rickwood, even though it's just one game. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there that say, you know what, I'd love to see a game at Old Tiger Stadium once a year, or at Memorial Stadium. You know what I'm saying? And we just don't have that. And all that history is lost when those stadiums get torn down.
Let me ask each of you this question. What old ballpark would you love to go back to that you've never been before? I mean, can't go back to Memorial because you obviously spent a lot of time there. But each of you, I'm sure, has sort of a deep wish to go back to see one old ballpark during maybe even one particular season.
Yeah, I thought about this. Sorry, Jesse. I would go to see the Dodgers and the Giants, back at the Polo Ground days, like when it's like 500 feet to center, or 450 or whatever it was. And then, like the short down the line. I would love to see those teams play back when they were still in New York.
I think, yes, seeing a game at Ebbets Field. So you can take the Polo Ground, and I will take Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, just for that atmosphere, just for that feel and how great the baseball was. But the funny thing is, right as you hit the 1950s, from the 40s into the 50s, attendances dropped. And so the Dodgers and the Giants fled to places where they could fill their ballparks. And the Dodgers had a lot of success, and the Giants didn't have that success early on. But, oh boy, those glory years, those stadiums, I could throw into, I never went to old Yankee Stadium. I've still never seen a game inside Wrigley Field currently. Yeah. So I've got a lot of stadiums that are still in use that would be on my checklist. But I would say Ebbets Field would be my number one.
Solid choices. Mine would be Yankee Stadium, 1923. I mean, just imagine the electric atmosphere with the Babe, with the new ballpark opening, with New York and the Jazz Age. I just can't imagine the atmosphere of a game then. And it would be totally different than what you get today. And, I love the new Yankee Stadium, and I've been to a lot of the old ballparks, including, many that have gone, County Stadium, Met, et cetera. But, in terms of capturing the old feel, Wrigley is such a gem, and let's not forget Dodger Stadium's almost 50 years old. It's a new ballpark, but an old one as well in many ways.
Well, Kevin, let me ask you, because as Mick just brought up, there is that difference, right? When a team moves from its old historic stadium into its new ballpark, and even though it's now been however many years since Camden Yards opened up, in 1992, and we did have 2131 there was that feeling that the Orioles lost something major in going from Memorial to Camden Yards. You, as a ballpark connoisseur, as a person who's been to a lot of stadiums, is there a relatively modern stadium that still has captured that feel of the atmosphere that we hold nostalgically close to us?
Oh, I think you got to go to Fenway and Wrigley. Fenway is benefited from decades of inertia. Let's put it that way. And when you start walking around the grandstand and realize that the walls there haven't been touched since the ballpark opened, basically, they're still narrow, they're still cramped. The Red Sox dressing room is still across the concourse from the entryway to the dugout. It just, you could see that a Fenway Frank sold today is pretty much the same as it was, 100 years ago. That is the place that I really feel best sums up the historical aspects to attending a baseball game. Wrigley, not so much. It's been changed over the years. It was changed in the 30s. It was, it's been forever tinkered with. The most recent improvements make it a much pleasant atmosphere. But the most recent experiences bring a lot of people to the stands that maybe weren't there when it was more fun. My first game was there in the 90s, and Wrigley still was untouched by the WGN magic. And so we went to a game there, and you had the Andy Frayne ushers, not in their epaulets and whatnot, but they were still the Andy Frayne ushers. They'd wipe your seat off with a chamois cloth. I remember buying an old style, which was still widely available there. Someone else bumped into me, knocked it out of my hands, and I went back to the concession stand. And I must have looked kind of sad because the woman working there said, "What's the matter, honey?" And I said, "Oh, I have to buy another beer because someone knocked it out of my hands." And she said, "This one's on me." And I thought, "Oh, it will never get better than this at any other ballpark ever again." And then the sun came out, and it was a beautiful day, and there were maybe 1,000 of us there.
Mick, let me ask you, before we get to the brand new ballparks, is there something about a relatively older ballpark? Who knows what can charm us, right? So out of all the ballparks you've been to, what's one facet about an older ballpark that has charmed you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up watching the Cubs on WGN. Harry and Steve, as much as I could get them. And when I went to Wrigley for the first time, I thought, this is like a movie set, like it just felt like a movie set, like walking down, Sheffield and Addison and, getting in there. And it's just like the rooftops across the street. Of course, this was before they added the scoreboard, which I like, honestly. I like all of the modern amenities that they've added, because without those, you wouldn't have the place, And I went to the World Series, that first game they were, back in the World Series, Game 3 in 2016. It was the first one since 1945 against the Tigers there. But I honestly, I like being able to sit in there, and it just the way that they designed the stadium, I like the way that it looks. I like the greens. I like the roof. I like the steel, and I know some people don't have the great seats, you'll get put behind like a steel beam once in a while in there, but there's just something about it. And also the sound. I mentioned that about Rickwood. Wrigley's the same way. It has that same sound to it, it's like it just curves and it's perfect. I like the organ, that they have someone that plays organ, and it just gives you that old feel to it. And when you go in the dugout, I can remember being in the dugout, Ron Santo with his arm around me, Billy Williams standing in front of me. We're at the back corner of the dugout back in 2010, and we're talking about stuff, and it's like, it was like this, because it's just small in there, but that's good, just because that's how it's always been, so I like it. And I'm glad that they still have the stadium. Not to say I don't like the new places either, but I just prefer, like you said, I haven't been to Fenway, but I can't wait to go, and I know I'll love it. I can guarantee you that.
We'll talk about the new stadiums. Let me tell you, Burlington, Community Field in Burlington, Iowa, something I love about it is with their bleachers, there's a ramp that is underneath all of the seats. And so when you're finished eating and drinking, you drop your trash and it rolls down the ramp, and then they just clean it right out of the front row.
Wow.
Okay, that could be silly. I like that little touch. I think that's great. And then Kevin, in going to spring training this year and visiting Bradenton and seeing Bradenton's ballpark, oh, it knocked my socks off. It entirely won me over.
Oh, yeah. What's amazing is they've managed to update it and improve all the player facilities, improve the fan facilities, and yet the grandstand still feels the same, even though it was redone not that long ago because of hurricane damage. And what was it like calling a game there?
Beautiful. So that was a game where I got to sit in the back of the booth and listen to the voices of the Blue Jays, shadow them, also walk around, take photographs. So it looked like it was a great time calling the game.
It is a great place to go to the game because that's been a ballpark site since the 20s. And there's a real interesting history behind it. It was a ballpark site for like the Bradenton, it was for spring training, like the Bradenton celery growers, I believe. Minor leagues. It was a real odd name. I hope that's it. If it's not,
I know that there was the Kalamazoo celery eaters at one point.
Yeah. Well, celery was big there. I mean, Buck O'Neill grew up in nearby Sarasota, worked in the celery fields as a kid. But it was there for the 20s, and then when wartime came, they tore it down. It was used as a holding site for military equipment. And then after the war ended, they built the layout to where it is now with the one main grandstand. Originally, that was it. And then now there's 3 structures there behind home plate. 2 of them were added late 40s, early 50s. And then over the years, it just sort of didn't change very much. And right now it and Dunedin, I think, are the 2 most purely residential ballparks in spring training, where there's not surrounded by parking lots. It's not surrounded by training facilities, because the Pirates at Pirate City, 3 or 4 miles away. But Braden is such a pure neighborhood ballpark, and they've kept that magic despite some calls to tear it down and sell it. But today, I think it and Dunedin, which you saw, Jesse, as well, are the 2 most neighborhood-oriented ballparks out there where a major league team touches it.
I'm seeing, by the way, the Bradenton Growers.
The Growers.
Just a quick Googling. But yeah, the Bradenton Celery Festival. Celery fact. Celery is the only food that I know of that you burn more calories eating it than you do ingesting it. It doesn't add more calories. It's a net positive for you whenever you eat it. Okay, new stadiums. It's great to say the old stadiums are wonderful. They are, for different specific charming reasons. And Mick, I love that description of the echo, the feeling of the ghosts and that great reverberation. All right, so brand new ballparks, we've been to them. What's a facet, Mick, that you really appreciate about a specific ballpark that's relatively new?
Yeah, I've broadcasted some games from Minute Maid Park in Houston. And besides the spy cameras, no, I'm just kidding. I really like the train, like the little train feature that they had out there, like they got this train, and it's got, it's Minute Maid Park, so it's got a bunch of oranges in it, and it's like the Crawford boxes. I like those, and it's indoor. And I mean, when you're in, Houston, it's so hot there, if you want people to show up, you need to have air conditioning, so they got that. So, but the train, like just kind of having that like unique feature, something fun for the kids. I was at another one, and I haven't been to this stadium, but I think I was the only person that didn't want Derek Jeter and the Marlins to take out the big fish sculpture. I love the fish sculpture, and then you guys took it out, and it was like, well, we don't need this. Yes, you do need that. You're not the Yankees. Like you're the Marlins, and it's. I want to see the bobblehead museum and the fish sculpture, and now all I can see is the bobblehead museum.
The Marlins should be. They're Miami. It should be more. Double down on the excess. Put up another big red comb statue on the other side. Instead, they made it very generic. So I'm totally with you, Mick. I mean, you're not the Yankees. Make it as colorful and gaudy and loud as you possibly can.
Yep. I've got to tell a quick train story. Montgomery's Riverwalk Stadium has the train tracks out beyond the left field wall. Bird Zirk comes in. One of Bird Zirk's routines is he convinces the opposing third baseman to let him field some grounders in between innings. The pitcher's going through his warm-ups. So finally, the third baseman relents. Bird Zirk fields a grounder, tosses it across. Third baseman thinks everything is fine. Bird Zirk takes off with the third baseman's glove, chucks it over the left field wall. It's great. It's a crowd pleaser. The third baseman can pitch a mini fit, and then his teammates retrieve for him his actual glove that's been in the dugout the whole time. Well, on this day in Montgomery, Bird Zirk chucks it over the left field wall. That's where the train tracks are, and here comes this train barreling through as the crowd is going crazy, and the third baseman plays it up. And then they give him his glove. And, of course, the very first pitch of the next half inning, it's hit right at him, and he botches it, clanks off the glove and back behind him, and the crowd gives him hell.
Only in minor league baseball. And only those circumstances, but the train is such a nice touch. There should every ballpark should have a train running outside of it. Oh, we lost. Oh, there he is. Cool. Lost you there for a second, Mick. Yeah, the old Saints ballpark in St. Paul had the train running by, and it would be there quite often. And of course, when it would cruise by, the public announcer said only one word: train. And then it was silent, and everyone went nuts because the train was there. And of course, the regular engineers would be honking away, even though they didn't need to. But enabling a purely silly, meaningless gesture in the middle of a ball game, I think, is one of the charms of minor league baseball.
I mean, it no longer exists in terms of the Mets play at a new field, but Shea Stadium had airplanes perpetually flying above. And anything where you can really just lean into something that's idiosyncratic. When there's an airport right there, and when you constantly have something going on, I love when a baseball team can just say, hey, it's all part of the experience. Just sit back, take it in.
Well, that whole notion of baseball as a pastoral experience in the middle of an urban atmosphere is really what makes baseball. We all love the notion of playing baseball in Field of Dreams and cornfields, but that's real quiet. It's one thing to be in the middle of an urban city, be coming off a subway, being surrounded by a ton of people, or off a bus or whatnot, and then walking in through the hallway, the vomitorium, and you walk in and there's this grass pastoral image in front of you. It's peaceful. It has organ music, which Mick referred to in Wrigley, something William Wrigley instituted decades and decades ago. It just provides a pure respite that I think many of us still need today.
So because Lansing is a downtown stadium, if there's a fire, if there's an emergency, you hear every police car, you hear every fire engine, you hear every motorcycle or any drag race that suddenly takes part down our right field side. At one point in one game, the fire alarm went off. Not a fire, but nobody could stop it from going off. So suddenly, send some help, and it's still going, and it's the 10th inning, and we walked off through the fire alarm. All right, let's change tacks right now. We talked Rickwood, we talked The Last Dance, and bringing things to the present. Also in the present, this past weekend, we had the NFL draft. We had a semblance of sports. And so this got me thinking about the draft. And, Kevin's got this in the background behind you. Baseball Thesaurus, 3rd edition. I'm fascinated by the way that we talk about sports. Talking about baseball, Mick and I as broadcasters, we've got our language for talking about it. Scouting language is its entirely own avenue. That scouting reports and the way that they're made up and the way that players have to be described, whether you're praising a guy or just tearing him down and saying we shouldn't draft him. So in just getting to think about scouting and the terms that are used, Mick, do you have any favorite terms?
Man, I mean, this is definitely your alley. But I mean, I hear them constantly, and when you guys sent me that, I was thinking, what term would I say, with scouting, it's like, I don't know, when I'm listening to the scouts talk about players, I'm always thinking, how can this guy go from being a high school amateur to a big leaguer? And how do these guys look at this player who's in a high school game and then say, hey, you know what, he's going to be, a major leaguer, and how they're able to do that is always kind of just amazing to me. But as far as a term that stands out to me, no, I really don't have one.
Let's just start talking about this and get the ball rolling, right? The guy's got to be projectable. So it's all about his ceiling, or how low is his floor. Have you ever heard that a player has caught helium? And so just like a balloon with helium will rise up, a guy with helium is suddenly rising up through the draft. Or a pop-up prospect where you've never heard of him. But just like in whack-a-mole, he has popped up out of nowhere and suddenly he's a prospect that you now need to pay attention to.
So, Mick, let me ask you this. In spring training, let's say you're calling a Cubs game and you run across a situation. So it's the bottom of the eighth at Sloan Park, and a kid who was a South Bend Cub last year, maybe Double-A this year, maybe not. What sort of verbiage do you use to describe someone like that your audience clearly will have no idea who they are?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it really depends on the player. I mean, a couple of years ago we had Nico Horner, who wasn't even on the Cubs roster, spring training roster, the major league side anyway. They had like 60 some guys, and he ended up making an impact. Like the games he came into, he batted over 500. He was just great. He had hit a bunch of balls and stuff. So I mean, you call this guy like he's a big time prospect. Like you. But then there's other guys that play because they'll take a handful of minor leaguers and put them into these big league games, and you may say like he's a fringe prospect, and there's a term for you, and it's like for us, and I know you probably feel this way too, Jesse. You want to be a lot more generous with those minor league guys than you would if you were, say, there full time, because you're going to have to go work with these guys down the line, and everything you say about them in this situation, in these games, means a lot to them and their family, So and I try to be really cognizant of that when I'm doing the games, But I'd say like fringe prospect be one. That I would use on some of these guys that I don't really think are going to make it, but they're still like kind of on that border.
Kevin, let me answer you in a couple of different ways. The first way is looking for the prospects, and so trying to figure out what's a guy's ETA, how far is he away? That way, a major league fan, you can say he's probably a year away, or he's probably 2 years away, whatever it might be. I like figuring out what a guy's role is. So if a guy comes into the game, is he a power guy? Is he a speed guy? Is he a slap hitter? Is he a glove guy? And so if he comes up to home plate and you can say something like, look, he's a glove guy. Here's what he did offensively, but here's how he helps you. And I love that phrase, how does this player help you? Oh, he's going to help you in the field, or he's going to help you on the bases. And that way you as a fan, you as a listener can say, well, if he gets on base, he can run. Or he's just up there right now. He's got a great eye. He might draw a walk, or he's just hoping that he runs into a fastball and hits it a long way.
Do you ever use the phrase organization guy?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and it's a lot less now than it used to be. We used to have more of the organizational guys. Just a difference in philosophy of development. We don't have as many of those players who are great people. Normally, if you say organizational player, I'm thinking that this guy's probably going to be a very good person. And he's going to be someone that brings in a great work ethic, and sets an example and brings leadership. And is pretty good at baseball too, maybe not good enough to get to the major leagues, but close enough where you'll keep that person around just because you like them. Now, I can give you an example. Taylor Davis was a good example of that for the Cubs. He was basically signed off the streets. He wasn't drafted and never really was supposed to make it to the major leagues. Last year, he hit a grand slam against the Cardinals that led to a Cubs win, and that's the highlight of his major league career. He's mostly in the minors. He's with Baltimore now, but stick around, and hey, he's an organizational guy. You're going to put him in AAA. He's going to work with your pitchers, going to hit for you, bring a great attitude to the game every day. And if you guys remember that video where he would like find the cameras, you remember that video? He like would do that look, that stare thing. He's famous because he went viral on that. So great guy though, and a great example of what an organizational player is.
I agree with Mick. When I first broke in, I thought being an org guy was an insult. You've heard the term JAG, just a guy. And now I've learned if you've got an org guy, that guy is valuable. There are so many players on a team who are not org guys, who've got great talent, but they're not going anywhere. They don't have the work ethic. They don't have what you need to, what you want out of a guy in the clubhouse. He's not going to inspire the guys around him. He's going to probably bring guys down for whatever reason. And so if there's a player who, as he comes up to home plate, and you can say very specifically to the listener, he's not a big prospect, but here's why he's valued. It's important. It's important if this is this star player's best friend, or this is this translator, whatever he brings to the table. There are some guys, Mick, you know them, they're the team barber. They cut everybody's hair, or whatever it might be. So yeah, if a guy's an org guy, that guy is valuable to have around.
Yeah, I agree.
Do they still keep players in the low minors for long periods of time in your experience? I mean, if you go back to Wisconsin Rapids, I mean, when the Minnesota Twins and Wisconsin Rapids is an affiliate, they had a player there named Mohill. Mohill played years and years for the Rapids Twins. He was an org guy. He was popular in the community. He was never going to be a major league player, but the Twins kept him there forever. And I'm wondering, and so you two watch this every day, so that's why I'm asking you, do you see it now, or is that sort of lessened?
If you don't mind as a player, because generally the players, they get married, they have families, maybe their in-laws are saying, why don't you find a real profession? Why don't you figure something out? Why don't you come home? As long as the player is okay continuing to go at it, teams love it. We've had guys who've been in the same league for 4 straight years. Generally, they're catchers because every team needs a guy who's a good catcher who can help out the pitcher, basically serve as another coach, or a guy who can play multiple positions. So whoever needs a day off, that guy has got you spelled. As long as the player doesn't mind, he's basically a player coach for the team.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I don't see it as much in the Cubs system right now, but I see it with some of the other teams that the Smokies play, where you'll see these guys. I mean, Barons used to have this guy, Christian Marrero, like he was with the Braves. And I mean, the guy was just like, must have been a fantastic person because, he was like the oldest guy on the team and he was pretty good. And he used to beat us up for some reason, and I'm like, we could use a Christian Marrero over here, like it'd be nice to have that guy who's been around the block and is going to help, the young players and kind of fill a spot in the lineup, We've lost so many games. Like it's been difficult because we've lost so much after having years and years and years of winning, you long for, a guy or two who is an org guy that's going to, help your team win. And there's a guy named Cal Irmer. You talk about the Twins. He was former manager of the Twins years ago, and he spent like 50 years with the Twins. And he started with the Washington Senators, and then when he was drafted by the Senators, and then came over. And anyway, he's an amazing scout. He was in the press box in Chattanooga when I worked there. And I remember him telling me the difference between winning and losing in the minor leagues is 3 or 4 players. 3 or 4 players. And he is exactly right. You get 3 or 4 players and your team can go from last to first. You lose 3 or 4 players, you can go from first to last. And it does not take very long at all. So if you got a couple of those organizational guys who are where they're at, they're probably good enough to play in AAA, but they're in AA right now. Probably the same thing in AAA. They're good enough to be in the big leagues. It's just not a spot for them. But if they bring the right attitude in every day, it's going to make the winning part of what you do in the minor leagues happen. And when you win, it's always better than the alternative. So, I have nothing but respect for those guys.
I think of the coach dynamic too. There's the Casey Stengel line, keep the 20 guys who are undecided away from the 5 guys who hate him. With coaches in the minor leagues, to a certain extent, they've got to be on the players' side. And it's good if they're players' coaches, but they're also reporting to the people above, and they're giving those daily reports. And so it helps so much if you've got a guy who can serve as the intermediary. The great South Bend manager, Mark Haley, managed in South Bend for years and years, would pick a couple of guys who he thought were clubhouse leaders, who other players really respected. And he would never yell at the team. If ever he was upset at anybody, he would bring those couple of guys into his office and he would ream them out. And he'd go, okay, and now let your teammates know. And so that way it would really be from that point. So with those players, whoever it might be, those players who've been around a while, it really is good if they're bilingual, whatever it might be, working to help the youngest guys or the most immature guys or whoever it might be, the introverts, the extroverts, to bring the team together. There's only so much that a coaching staff can do.
Basically, we've just described Bull Durham in a nutshell with the talk of an organizational guy, haven't we?
I mean, it's legit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, shall we wrap things up for this week?
Perfect.
Mick, thank you so much for your time. Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, have a great week, guys.
This has been the Ballpark Digest Broadcaster Chat. Check things out, ballparkdigest.com. Subscribe to the newsletter. And if you haven't already,
buy the book. Buy the book.
Farewell, everyone.
All right, guys. Talk to you next